welcome. This is the Kelly's Astrology podcast, where you can find insight, guidance, and understanding through astrology. I'm Kelly, and I'll be your host. Hey there, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Kelly's Astrology podcast. Today, we're going to talk about planets that are retrograde in Aries. I want to touch on Venus retrograde in Aries, which started back on March the 1st. And I also want to talk about Mercury retrograde in Aries, which actually starts on March 15. I also wanted just to check in with you all. I hope that you are doing okay with all of the instability that is emanating out of this eclipse. It is a very unstable astrological time, and I know that those wobbles are out in the world. So I just hope that you're all finding your way as best you can. If you're new to my show and you do want to know more about the eclipse, check out last week's episode, which is a deep dive on the Virgo lunar eclipse. And it also talks a lot about the South Node, which will be helpful. So back to the retrogrades, which is something that I have been meaning to do a show on. So I'm glad that we get to talk about it today. So Venus is already retrograde in Aries. She has been retrograde in Aries since the 1st of March. But starting this weekend, the 15th and 16th of March, we will now have two planets retrograde in Aries as soon as Mercury stations retrograde. And just in general, this is likely to mean hitting the brakes, slowing down, and a lot of rethinking and reassessing. We know that Aries is a sign that typically likes to move quickly, that likes to be decisive and bold. But right now, with both Venus and Mercury retrograde in Aries, there's a lot of questions or there is stuff to figure out before you can move forward. What I want to do in today's show is catch up on Venus retrograde first, and then we'll take a look at Mercury retrograde. Before we dive into all of that, I want to make sure that you know about my next astrology webinar coming up in April. It is all about ancient timing. I'm going to show you how to work with the ascensional times of the signs and the minor years of the planets. So in this webinar, you'll discover two new and really fun ways to activate timing in your birth chart. If you've ever wondered when an aspect in your birth chart might be influencing you most strongly, these techniques can help answer that question. Working with these techniques is much easier than you think, and it's likely to help point out important periods in your life that you may not have tuned into yet. So you'll be learning about the minor years of the planets, you'll be learning about the ascensional times of the signs, and that almost immediately, it's a very quick and accessible timing technique. Once you get the data, you will immediately be able to identify when Venus stuff is going on for you, or when Mars stuff is going on for you, or when that big Mars-Saturn aspect in your chart is really active. So if you'd like to learn more about these techniques, pop over to kellysastrology.com where you can find out more or register today. All right, so let's take a look at Venus retrograde. So Venus began her retrograde on March 1st, and she will be retrograde until April 12th. So from March 1st to April 12th, Venus is reversing through the zodiac. She is in backwards motion, and a lot of the symbolism of reversing and backwards or going back over or returning is all part of the Venus retrograde. Now, Venus is actually retrograde the least of all the planets, and so her retrogrades are a little bit more poignant and they can feel a little bit more impactful. Venus is retrograde every 18 months or so, and for about 6 weeks each time that she does go retrograde. And Venus retrograde periods are thought to correlate with those sort of 40-day retreat review periods that we see showing up in different philosophical and religious traditions. So Venus retrograde is a potent time for reevaluation, more so than any other planetary retrograde. While Venus is retrograde, you might be evaluating what you desire, who and what you love, how you are finding enjoyment and fulfillment in your life. You might be questioning what you enjoy, who you love, and you might actually be tweaking or making some changes so that your desires and the connections that you're involved in really reflect what you find most pleasurable, most satisfying right now. One personal thing that I've been using this Venus retrograde for is sorting out some of the artwork in our home. There's a new piece that I needed to get framed, but doing that prompted me to finally get a piece of artwork reframed. And this sort of ties back to, 8 years ago, we bought this piece of artwork. We were on a trip for my sister's wedding. And when we got home, we had it framed and mounted, but we never loved the frame that we first got. There was this whole disagreement with the framer, and we wanted one thing and they were suggesting something different. And we never really were satisfied, even though we kind of went ahead and paid for it anyway. And so for years, I've been looking at this picture that I've loved. I love the image, but I have always had that, when I see the frame. It just wasn't the right color for the image itself. And finally, earlier this month, just a few days after Venus went retrograde, I took this picture off to the framer to get it done the way that we had always wanted it. And so this idea of redoing, fixing, tweaking to do with art, to do with beauty, that's all part of Venus retrograde. Whether it's artwork on your walls, whether it's a piece of furniture that you consider an eyesore and you're finally dealing with it, whether there's something that's not comfortable in your home or in your office space, you're like, I'm going to address that now. Venus is beauty, she is art, she is comfort. And so we're really paying attention to the irritations there and figuring out what we might want to do about it. So that Venus retrograde is sometimes redefining pleasure, or it might be, addressing things that are irritating to do with art or beauty or relationships so that you can remove that source of friction. One of the special features about Venus retrogrades is that they actually return to the same part of the zodiac every 8 years. And that means that the current Venus retrograde, which is happening partly in the sign of Aries and partly in the sign of Pisces, this is reactivating the Venus retrograde from March and April 2017. That is about 8 years ago, and it was in March and April of 2017 that Venus was last retrograde in Pisces and in Aries. So a part of the zodiac, a part of your chart, a part of your life that was stirred up or maybe under review in that March, April 2017 period is being reactivated now. There's a resonance between March, April 2025 and the Venus retrograde now and the one that we had in 2017. So that may be relevant for you. For me, 2017 is the year that we bought this piece of artwork that I have finally gone to get redone. And whether it's something simple like that, whether it's something more formative about a big relationship development or a major shift around self-worth that you were dealing with in 2017, that you're ready to tweak, upgrade, or refine further now under this kind of resonant Venus retrograde. So this year, 2025, Venus is retrograde mostly in Aries, but a little bit in Pisces. And I want to break down the difference about Venus retrograde in Aries versus Venus retrograde in Pisces. So dates and details first. Venus is retrograde in Aries from March 1st to 27th. Then Venus will be retrograde in Pisces from March 27th to April 12th. Now, for Venus, the first part of her retrograde, when she is retrograde in Aries, is probably the more perplexing or irritating or frustrating part. And that's because Venus is both retrograde and in detriment. So Venus's sign condition in Aries is that detriment place, and we've got her retrograde as well. So there is an experimental quality to Venus. There is a mismatch between Venus and the qualities or desires of Venus and the place that she is. So it's like, I want to do these things, but I'm not in the right setting to support that. Or this is my goal or my intention, but I need to develop some new skills or I need some new tools to help me with that. So it's that mismatch or misalignment that we're really navigating while Venus is retrograde in Aries. That might mean that you have more of an independent or experimental attitude. It might mean that you're finding you want space from people you usually spend lots of times with. Venus in Aries is very independent, very autonomous, very much like it's my way or it's not at all kind of thing. Venus in Aries wants to do for herself and really wants to kind of own her wants and her desires. The second part of Venus retrograde, when Venus is retrograde in Pisces, so this is the very end of March and the almost first half of April, that has a different feeling altogether. Here we have Venus still retrograde, but now she is in the sign of her exaltation. Venus is exalted in Pisces. And here we're still doing the questioning and the reevaluating, the reassessing of Venus retrograde, but there is perhaps more of a smooth, softer, or maybe a healing focus because Venus in Pisces is more focused on repair and connection or about quality time. There's a little bit more of a tender togetherness vibe to Venus in Pisces that is very different from Venus in Aries. So the whole time Venus is retrograde from March 1st to April 12th, we are questioning and exploring what we love, what we enjoy, who we love, how we want to love, our self-worth, enjoyment, pleasure, comfort, leisure, relaxation. All of these Venus things are up for review. While Venus is retrograde, you may remember what you love that you have neglected or forgotten. So that is the resurfacing that we can get in really helpful ways. I always used to love this activity. I'm going to do more of it. I always did enjoy spending time with that person or going to this place. I'm going to do more of it. I can't believe I forgot. So that idea of remembering, reawakening, reconnecting can be a really constructive part of the retrograde process. So Venus retrograde in general can be a special time to really withdraw, to pull your loving attention back to your own heart, especially while Venus is retrograde in Aries. Put yourself first, and maybe you're seeing what's happening when you don't do that. So Venus retrograde in Aries is very much like focused on the self. Venus retrograde in Pisces is more concerned with how we can bond and repair and grow together. So you're allowed to have, time for each of those options. You can remember neglected loves, hobbies, or experiences while Venus is retrograde. And it might be a time of reawakening joy or updating and improving connections with others, especially around the topics of the Aries and Pisces parts of your chart. Think about the topics of your Aries house, the topics of your Pisces house, and see how you can have more fun in those areas of your life. And it's a bit of a trial and error process with Venus retrograde there, but we're trying to figure out what is fun for me now. So I hope that you will have some fun with Venus retrograde. Let me know in the comments below how that is going for you so far. Maybe you too will be tweaking something beautiful in your home so that it truly makes you smile, just like I did with this piece of artwork. We just picked the reframed piece up earlier today, and we've hung it in this new, more prominent position, and it just made me smile. I was like, oh, finally. And so I wish that sort of joy or pleasure or kind of uplift moment for all of you in whatever way is relevant for you. Okay. While I could talk about Venus retrograde for days, I did want to quickly touch on Mercury retrograde in today's show as well. So let's switch focus now. Mercury retrograde is a shorter cycle. It does happen more often. You're used to hearing me talk about it and other astrologers talk about it, so you're probably more familiar with it. So the next Mercury retrograde cycle starts on March 15. Depending on when you're listening to this, it might have already started. Mercury will be retrograde from March 15 to April 7. Now, similar to Venus, Mercury's retrograde is partly in Aries and partly in Pisces. However, unlike Venus, the messier part of Mercury retrograde will probably be when Mercury is in Pisces towards the end of its retrograde, because that is the trickier sign for Mercury. Mercury is less clear and a little bit more muddled in Pisces versus in Aries. So the first part of Mercury retrograde is in Aries, and that's from March 15 to March 29. The second part of Mercury retrograde is in Pisces, and that's from March 29 to April 7. So just a quick overview recap here. Both Venus and Mercury will be retrograde in the second half of March and the early part of April. So that is kind of a little bit of a muddled, maybe disorganized time. In the second half of March, we also have two eclipses. So there is a questioning, kind of unstable or uncertain energy that is coming through on many levels in this late March, early April period. It is a time where reversals, delays, and lots of chopping and changing in direction are likely. So you're going to change your choice. You're going to want one thing today, and tomorrow you're going to want something different. And we want to give ourselves a lot of flexibility, a lot of grace, a lot of space to choose and then re-choose. And you might actually be saying to people, I'm not ready to decide yet. That is probably my best piece of just general advice for this late March, early April period. You may want to wait until the Mercury retrograde ends after April 7, or you might push it out until after April 12 when the Venus retrograde ends before you lock in any long-term or lasting commitments. Short-term things, less of an issue, but if you've got stuff you're trying to plan for, 4 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, I would wait a little bit longer just for now. So let's get back to Mercury. Don't want to ignore him. So Mercury's retrograde, we do hear a lot about it. There are things that you can keep doing while Mercury is retrograde. I actually like to think of Mercury retrograde as a great time for catching up. So you could think about Mercury retrograde as a time to organize or sort out and manage unfinished business. So it's not a time necessarily to start new initiatives or new business or new projects. But if you have things that aren't settled yet, if you've got a decision that is outstanding, if you've got paperwork that is incomplete, if you've got, this messy kind of vibe in your space, now is the time for that tidying, sorting, organizing, and filing. So, between the retrogrades and the eclipses, this isn't the best, most stable or calm kind of energy for beginnings. And so instead, you might think of this period, it's Mercury retrograde plus the eclipse, and I'll talk about the direct link between the two in just a second. Think of this period in the second half of March, especially as a housekeeping time, for catching up, for spring cleaning, or for autumn cleaning if you're in Australia. But that spring cleaning vibe where you just want to clear, organize, streamline. You want to get rid of mess and gunk and that accumulation. So filing, sorting through that general mess that just accumulates over time, stuff that's in your space, maybe tasks or obligations that are just happening in your schedule. Every time you get there, you're like, why did I say I would do this again? What we're trying to do here is clear as much as we can. So finishing things, finalizing outstanding matters, getting back to people if you owe an email or a voice note or a phone call to them. It might also mean that you're stepping back from obligations that you've rethought. With Mercury retrograde, we're reviewing, revising, rethinking. And once you rethink, you might actually realize you need to change your choice. I don't want to do this anymore. I've got to communicate that change of mind to others. Now, this Mercury retrograde does take on a little bit of an extra significance because Mercury is the ruler of that very kind of depleting or low energy lunar eclipse in Virgo. And that reinforces these themes of looking back or dealing with the past before you move forward. And that energy is really strong in these final 2 weeks of March, partly because that's the time frame where that Virgo lunar eclipse is most in play. And so the energy of the ruler of that eclipse, which is Mercury retrograde, ties in there as well. So the eclipse is about letting go. Mercury retrograde is like, I'm going backwards before I'm going forwards. You might feel there's a repetitive quality. Didn't I already do this? Okay, what did I miss the first time around? So that idea of going over, reversing course, I would really encourage you to give yourself permission to not power forward right now and to pause and to instead look around where you currently are. What needs to be straightened out so that I can maybe feel more calm and settled when it is time to move forward? So let me know what kind of closure or organizing or decluttering project you are working on right now. Or let me know if you've got an art or a beauty or another Venus type project that you're finally resolving. I'd love to hear your experiences with Venus retrograde in Aries and then in Pisces, and Mercury retrograde in Aries and in Pisces. Let me know your stories in the comments below. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.